Bonjour, bienvenue à tous, Excellencies, distinguished guests. Welcome to this special event on the sidelines of the 77th World Health Assembly on accelerating vaccine and therapeutic production for health security in Africa. I'm Folie Batibo, and I'm delighted to be your moderator for the third event of its kind in this beautiful location. Our heartfelt gratitude to the organizers, the Permanent Mission of France to the United Nations in Geneva, for hosting us once again this year in this beautiful venue, and to Medicine's Patent Pool for making this gathering possible yet again. We'd also like to acknowledge our partners, the World Health Organization, the World Economic Forum, CEPI, and the US National Academy of Medicine. A warm welcome, a special welcome to all those joining us online from around the world, and to those of you here in Geneva who've taken some time off your busy World Health Assembly schedule to be with us today. Thank you very much. A reminder that translation is available in French and English should you need it. You should have sets on your seats. Now, distinguished guests, last year, right from the spot, we discussed the importance of the mRNA technology transfer program and how it can be used by low and middle income countries to develop their vaccine manufacturing capabilities. Today, we are back to discuss how we can enhance the current ecosystem for vaccine manufacturing across the African continent, not just mRNA, but a system that is effective for all vaccines. Africa, as you know, is still largely reliant on other regions for its life-saving vaccines and therapeutics. At the moment, only 1% of its vaccines are manufactured locally. The other 99%, as you know, are imported. So how do we change this dynamic? As you heard from Dr. Tedros there, the delay in accessing life-saving COVID-19 vaccines has shown that Africa still has a while to go, but there is real momentum from both the public and private sectors to bring manufacturing home. So how do we build responsive, resilient, and reliable vaccine ecosystems on the continent? How do we harmonize and strengthen the regulatory framework? What does it take to attract funding and to encourage cross-border trade when it comes to vaccine manufacturing? And also, what does it take to build a skilled workforce and retain it as well? So these are some of the questions that we'll be discussing over the next hour and a half with our distinguished panelists, whom I'll introduce in just a moment. But first, let's hear from our hosts. I'd like to call on first France's Ambassador for Global Health, Madame Anne-Claire Amprou, to give us her opening remarks. Madame Ambassador.
Mesdames et Messieurs les ministres, Madame la Présidente du Board du Medicine's Patent Pool, chère Marie-Paul, qui est là, voilà, je te cherchais. Mesdames et Messieurs les présidents, les directeurs, chers collègues, chers amis, bienvenue pour cette nouvelle édition, comme l'année dernière, à la mission française pour cet événement. Et je suis ravie d'ouvrir cet événement. Et je vais l'ouvrir en faisant une annonce d'un autre événement. En général, on fait la clôture avec l'annonce d'un événement, mais je vais commencer par cette annonce et je vais vous expliquer pourquoi. Cet événement a lieu moins d'un mois avant le Forum mondial pour la souveraineté et l'innovation vaccinale que le président de la République coprésidera le 20 juin à Paris avec l'Union africaine et Gavi en collaboration avec les CDC Afrique et Équipe Europe. Et donc pourquoi je fais cette annonce dès l'ouverture de cet événement? Parce que, à l'occasion de cet événement, le 20 juin à Paris, Gavi lancera son nouvel accélérateur de fabrication des vaccins en Afrique, outil qu'on appelle AVMA, et j'en profite pour saluer Madame Sania Nishtar qui est avec nous ce soir. Et Gavi lancera aussi son argumentaire d'investissement pour son prochain cycle stratégique qui couvrira la période 2026-2030. Alors, qu'est-ce que AVMA, cet outil d'accélération pour la production de vaccins en Afrique? C'est un outil de structuration du marché qui incitera les fabricants régionaux à développer des chaînes de production de vaccins durables. Et le lancement de cet outil, AVMA, sera un rappel de ce qui peut être réalisé grâce à une forte impulsion politique et une source d'inspiration pour ce qui pourrait être en soutien à la production régionale au-delà de la production de vaccins. Mais si cet outil AVMA cristallise de nombreuses attentes, et c'est normal, cet outil ne fonctionnera qu'en étant bien articulé avec autre chose. D'abord, un environnement propice à la production régionale. Et ensuite, à une demande durable de produits locaux de santé. Et il ne prétend donc pas être le seul outil de soutien à la production régionale de vaccins ou plus largement en santé. L'événement de ce soir est justement d'examiner ce que chaque partenaire peut faire pour contribuer au succès des initiatives de production régionale, en restant bien conscient que nous avons tous, et je dis bien tous, un rôle à jouer à un moment ou à un autre de la chaîne d'approvisionnement en produits de santé régionaux adaptés aux besoins, du laboratoire à l'usager. Et à cet égard, je tiens à saluer le travail réalisé par l'OMS et le Medicines Patent Pool avec la mise en œuvre réussie de ce programme OMS de transfert de technologies ARN messager et le développement des capacités de ces 15 partenaires en Afrique, en Amérique latine, en Asie et en Europe d'une manière durable et surtout axée sur les besoins qui ont été identifiés. La France a été très présente dès le départ, dès en 2021, et continuera à se mobiliser pour assurer le succès de ce programme qui doit aussi beaucoup à United, et je salue les représentants d'United, dont nous sommes très fiers. La production régionale, comme le directeur général de l'OMS l'a dit tout à l'heure, c'est un formidable outil pour améliorer l'équité d'accès aux produits de santé et renforcer nos capacités de prévention, de préparation et de riposte aux crises. Et cet AMS est bien placé pour le savoir et cela nous occupe beaucoup. La France a déjà investi plus de 300 millions d'euros pour soutenir la production régionale, notamment en Afrique, et elle le fait autour de 4 piliers qu'elle considère indispensables et complémentaires. Le premier, c'est le soutien financier direct à des partenaires commerciaux tels que Biovac, Afrigène, Aspen et l'Institut Pasteur de Dakar. Le deuxième pilier, c'est le développement des capacités de recherche et de développement, notamment dans les pays en développement et par l'intermédiaire du réseau des Instituts Pasteur. Le troisième pilier, c'est le renforcement de la réglementation pharmaceutique. Et nous le faisons, nous venons en appui notamment au Rwanda et en Afrique de l'Ouest. Et enfin, le quatrième pilier, j'en finirai là, c'est le développement des formations pour soutenir nos partenaires engagés dans la mise en place des capacités de production régionale. Et à cet égard, nous soutenons l'Académie de l'OMS basée à Lyon. Et comme je le disais tout à l'heure, aucun de ces piliers ne peut fonctionner de manière indépendante. Ils sont complémentaires. Et donc, j'espère que la discussion d'aujourd'hui nous fournira des informations en plus complémentaires sur la manière dont les initiatives actuelles peuvent être renforcées. C'est important. Nous étions là l'année dernière, nous sommes là aujourd'hui. C'est un suivi et on voit que ce programme fonctionne. Et donc, évidemment, nous attendons beaucoup des discussions de ce soir et je vous souhaite une bonne séance de travail et on se retrouve tout à l'heure. Merci à vous.
Merci beaucoup. Merci, Madame Anne-Claire Amprou, France's Ambassador for Global Health, for those opening remarks, and thank you to France for its continued support in promoting health security on the African continent. And now I'd like to call on our other host, Dr. Marie-Paule Kinney, Chair of the MPP Board, to give us her opening remarks.
I'm short. Bonsoir. Good evening. Honorable ministers, ambassadors, chère Anne-Claire, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to be here again at the French mission for the third time this year
Française
on
pour la
behalf
troisième
of the
fois
Medicines
cette
Patent
année
Pool and
au
on
nom
the
du pool
mRNA
de
Technology
médecine
Transfer
et
Program.
le programme de
Due
transfert
to illness, Charles
d'ARN
Gore,
messager.
Executive Director of Medicines Patent Pool, cannot be with us
Le
today.
directeur exécutif
But
du
we
pool,
certainly sense you
MPP,
all
ne
his
peut pas
best
être
regards.
ici, mais il vous envoie
So this
son
year,
meilleur
we
souvenir et
decided
ses
to
meilleurs
broaden
messages.
the focus
Nous sommes
of
ici
the
pour
event in
élargir
order to discuss
le
the
focus de
broader
l'événement pour que nous
of
puissions
regional manufacturing, particularly in Africa. Regional manufacturing is precisely the premise on which the mRNA Technology Transfer Program was created in July 2021 as a response to the inequities seen during the pandemic. Our partners across 15 low and middle income countries are working together across continent to develop and transfer technology so as to enhance the capacity to manufacture and supply mRNA vaccines. The initial focus of the program was COVID-19, and over time, it has expanded to address other diseases of importance to the various partners, including dengue, malaria, RSV, or tuberculosis. In the 3 years since the program started, we have made significant progress in mRNA vaccine development. And I invite you to talk to Petro. Petro, where are you? If you want to know more about the advancement of this program. We have built incredible partnerships and recently established the first 4 R&D consortia in Southeast Asia, bringing together manufacturers, academic and research institutions that will hopefully contribute to the development of tomorrow's vaccines. Over the coming months and years, we will see more of these partnerships or consortia develop also in other regions, with a view to supporting the development of vaccines that respond to local needs. We must stay focused on our end goal, vaccines made locally or regionally that are quality assured, affordable, and respond to the needs of a local production. For that, we must continue to concentrate sorry. Sorry. We must continue to concentrate on ensuring a robust ecosystem. Of course, this ecosystem is not just needed for vaccines, but is also critical for therapeutics. So let me mention 7 of the elements of this ecosystem. First, good physical infrastructures and manufacturing facilities that are compliant with international standards. 2, access to capital to support product pipeline development and technology transfer. 3, a well-trained and educated workforce. 4, a supportive regulatory environment that encourages foreign investment. 5, policies that support innovation and local manufacturers that may include incentives, subsidies, and funding. 6, access to local and regional markets, as well, if possible, to international markets, so companies can sell their products. And finally, 7, access to the needed technologies, including any intellectual property rights that may be required. Today, we hope to unpack some of these critical areas in this session by sharing successful models and experiences from countries and organizations. We need to learn from each other and work together so that the world is better prepared and more resilient for future pandemics, with a capacity to manufacture regionally the countermeasures that may be needed in and across low and middle income countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kini, for your remarks, which have certainly set the tone for our discussions, which we will get to in just a moment. But before that, a special address from a very special guest who's joined us today. Please join me in welcoming to the stage the Minister of Health for Tunisia, His Excellency Professor Ali Mrabet.
honorable ministre, chers collègues, chers amis, mesdames et messieurs, Aslema, hello, bonjour. Aslema, that means hello in my language in Tunisian. Merci pour l'invitation. Je suis tellement heureux d'être parmi vous et de se revoir et de parler de l'expérience tunisienne en la matière. Le programme de l'OMS de transfert des technologies des vaccins à base d'ARN messager consiste, comme vous savez, à renforcer les capacités locales des pays africains à produire leurs propres vaccins en se focalisant sur la technologie ARN messager. Et d'ailleurs, une technologie qui a prouvé son efficacité lors de la pandémie de Covid-19. Au fait, la Tunisie, en avril 2021, le ministère de la Santé a exprimé son intérêt à acquérir la technologie vaccin à base d'ARN messager. Et en février 2022, comme vous le savez, l'une des grandes annonces du sommet Union africaine, Union européenne, était que la Tunisie soit désignée comme pays receveur de la technologie vaccin à base d'ARN messager. Et une task force ARN messager a été créée à l'Institut Pasteur de Tunis. Je rappelle que l'Institut Pasteur Tunis est le 3e institut créé dans le monde, après celui de Paris et Saigon. Et nous avons fêté 130 ans, c'était dernièrement, le 130e anniversaire de l'Institut Pasteur Tunis. L'Institut Pasteur Tunis, en 1928, a eu le prix Nobel pour Charles Nicolle, qui était l'un des directeurs de cet Institut Pasteur Tunis. Juste pour l'histoire. Donc, l'Institut Pasteur, un fleuron de recherche et de réussite pour la Tunisie et pour le monde entier. L'Institut Pasteur donc, a choisi de se focaliser sur le volet recherche et développement en créant une unité recherche-développement dédiée au développement de vaccins à base d'ARN messager. Le but était de créer une plateforme dotée de tout le matériel nécessaire qui sera mise au service de tous les chercheurs tunisiens et ceux de la région Nord-Afrique, afin de les soutenir pour développer des vaccins à base d'ARN messager contre une panoplie de pathogènes qui touchent notamment l'Afrique et les autres pays partenaires du programme, à peu près une quinzaine. Nous avons réalisé une étude de faisabilité et de fabrication de vaccins en début 2022, un rapport qui a été validé en juin 2022. Il nous reste maintenant l'étude de faisabilité, donc plutôt le plan opérationnel de cette étude de faisabilité, et la Banque mondiale nous a promis un soutien pour cela. Et je sais qu'il y a d'autres partenaires et amis qui nous soutiendront dans ce projet-là. En avril 2023, une année en arrière, l'Institut Pasteur Tunis a eu un don de l'OMS pour soutenir encore l'activité développement de vaccins à base d'ARN messager. Il s'agissait d'un automate de synthèse d'ARN messager. À peu près 36 personnels de santé et scientifiques ont pu profiter des formations et stages assurés par le hub de formation stage de l'OMS à Séoul. Une délégation de médecine patent pool donc, a visité la Tunisie dernièrement en août 2023. Cette visite a été jugée positive par les différents partenaires et a révélé le potentiel de l'Institut Pasteur Tunis à réussir un transfert fluide de la technologie ARN messager et a contribué d'une manière conséquente au développement de plusieurs vaccins pour les différents pays partenaires, notamment des vaccins contre la leishmaniose, la tuberculose et la rage. Maintenant donc, nous comptons avoir une unité de recherche-développement dédiée au développement de vaccins à base d'ARN messager, bien équipée, totalement fonctionnelle, et notamment d'ici la fin de l'année 2024. Et grâce à cette unité fonctionnelle, des projets de développement de plusieurs vaccins contre, leishmaniose, tuberculose, West Nile, ont été engagés avec plusieurs partenaires, notamment coréens, sud-africains, brésiliens. Je remercie Dr. Fude qui se va rendre en Tunisie, je ne le vois pas, donc il est où? Il est là, salut, coucou. Donc, qui va se rendre en Tunisie d'ici la fin du mois pour concrétiser tout ça. Donc voilà l'expérience tunisienne. Je tiens à vous remercier une autre fois et je vous demande de m'excuser parce que j'ai tenu à être parmi vous et je vais juste vous quitter pour aller prendre mon avion. Allez, à très bientôt.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Ministre. Merci d'avoir pris le temps d'être parmi nous aujourd'hui. Thanks to the Tunisian Minister of Health there for being with us today and for telling us about the Tunisian experience in enhancing vaccine and therapeutics in his country, access to those. Now, so then we've heard, from these introductory remarks, a number of questions posed. How does Africa build a responsive, reliable, and resilient vaccine ecosystem? How do we improve conditions of technology transfer and develop local production capacities? So for the first session of the evening, for the first part of the evening, we have two exciting presentations for you. Each of them will explore a specific aspect of enhancing Africa's vaccine manufacturing ecosystem. Our first presentation is from Dr. Abebe Bayi from the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Please join us. The Africa CDC has set out to manufacture 60% of the continent's vaccines in Africa by the year 2040, and Dr. Abebe will be telling us about this and other initiatives. Please join us on stage, Dr. Abebe.
Bonsoir. Thank you very much for inviting us to really share with you what we're doing in Africa CDC in terms of promoting local manufacturing on the continent. Next slide, please. So as you all know, since COVID-19 pandemic, the political commitment and the momentum in terms of establishing manufacturing companies on the continent is really growing by the day, and we're having manufacturing facilities built in the different corners of the continent. For us in Africa CDC, for sustainable vaccine manufacturing, we think we need to approach it end to end and support the different aspects of the manufacturing value chain, from supply side, from demand side, and also in between the enablers. So Africa CDC is working on all aspects of the vaccine manufacturing so that we will have a sustainable manufacturing ecosystem. The commitment is good, the political will is excellent, but then that commitment has to be translated into something in action. Next slide, please. So recently we have done a suppliers landscape analysis together with CHAI and PATH, and we have analyzed how the suppliers, the vaccine manufacturing ecosystems looks like on the continent. So that means we have data in terms of what kind of manufacturing facility is established in which part of the continent and what kind of vaccines are coming to the market. So for us in Africa CDC, the finish line for vaccine manufacturers is when they make it to the market and avail their products to the continental market and beyond. So on the supply side, we have more than 23 manufacturing facilities set up on the continent. And the next step is to work on the demand side of the manufacturing ecosystem. Next slide, please. That's good, but I'm tired. So this is the landscape, how it looks like on the continent. So we have about 23 manufacturing facilities in the different stages of development. Some of them have really progressed well and set to manufacture vaccines in the near future and avail their products to the continental market. And on the other side of the continent, we have manufacturing facilities in the planning. So the kind of support they need from the continental organizations or international initiatives is different. The ones close to the market, they need sustainable demand. The ones who are trying to transfer technology, So they need some sort of support in terms of tech transfer or workforce development. So we have a kind of bespoke model in terms of supporting the manufacturers, or the 23 manufacturers across the continent. 9 of them right now, they're either set to produce vaccines or in the process of tech transferring. Next slide, please. So in the near future, from 2025 to 2030, we have 3 manufacturers with 8 products that will be really available for the continental market. We're not including this, the manufacturers that are targeting the domestic market. These are the ones that will reach to the continental market in the next 4 to 5 years. So they're in the process of acquiring or expecting the pre-qualification, and they're doing both fill and finish and drug substance manufacturing. If you look at the whole 23 manufacturing facilities, most of them are focusing on fill and finish side of the manufacturing. But for us, for sustainability, we really need to support drug substance manufacturing and even go up to R&D so that we will have a sustainable ecosystem on the continent. Next slide, please. So we have seen the status of the different enablers on the continent. So most of the issues related to technology transfer, regulatory, and funding are in the process of being addressed. And the technical capabilities and trade-related matters, they are on track, but we have a big problem. The big problem is demand. So who is going to really buy these vaccines on the continent? So that's why this Sunday, we had a ministerial consultation here on the sidelines of the WHO, and we had 48 ministers in one room. And we presented this to them, and there was very good commitment and consensus in terms of buying African products. So that will really give us the offtake guarantee that manufacturers really need as we speak. So these are the different enabling factors, and we will be really focusing our work on demand creation and offtake guarantee in the coming years. Next slide, please. So what we're doing in terms of creating the platform for the market is the pool procurement mechanism. So on the 37th ordinary session of the AU Assembly, the African Union heads of state made 3 important decisions in relation to manufacturing. One is they made a decision for Africa CDC to set up and run a pool procurement mechanism with the support of Afreximbank and United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. And as we speak right now, we're working on the design of the pool procurement mechanism in partnership with partners like UNICEF and Afreximbank and UNECA. The second one is to expand the mandate of Africa CDC to go beyond vaccines and support manufacturing of therapeutics, diagnostics, and health products. And the third, now we have a champion of local manufacturing. His Excellency President William Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya, is now assigned as a champion of local manufacturing on the continent. So he will take the agenda of local manufacturing both on the continental and international stage. Next slide, please. So just a little bit on the pool procurement mechanism. We're in the process of setting up African pool procurement mechanism in collaboration with Afreximbank and UNECA, United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, and also with the support of UNICEF. So this pool procurement mechanism will be a platform so that our manufacturers will have offtake guarantee or predictable demand. Of course, it doesn't really give them the offtake guarantee, but it will be a platform to really consolidate demand on the continent. And of course, on the other side, we will be able to supply our member states with quality products, uninterrupted quality products through the pool procurement mechanism. we don't want to go into at once. We're approaching it in a stepwise fashion where we will start with a startup phase where we will have a selected few products and a few member states to be served through the pool procurement mechanism. And then we'll develop a more a wider scope, which is a consolidation phase, where we will be including more products and more member states. And when we reach through the maturation phase, we expect to cover most of the health products that the continent needs and also to serve as many member states as possible. So now the question is, now you know how the vaccine manufacturing ecosystem is evolving and the areas that we have strengths on and the areas that need support. So we would like to call upon partners, international organizations, to really work with us in Africa CDC so that we have a very focused support and intervention in the vaccine manufacturing value chain. I would like to just mention only one interventions that we're working with our partner Gavi. That's the African Vaccine Manufacturing Accelerator. This is a $1 billion innovative financing mechanism that we think will be a game changer in terms of supporting African vaccine manufacturing. And it will preferentially support more drug substance manufacturing on the continent that will take us to sustainability in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abebe, for that crucial and timely presentation on the need for a stable platform for harmonized African health product manufacturing. Thank you very much. And next, I'd like to call on Dr. Sania Nishtar, Executive Director of Gavi, the Global Vaccine Alliance, to give us her presentation.
Good evening, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's indeed a pleasure and a privilege to be here, and I want to start off by thanking the Government of France for hosting this event. I want to thank Marie-Paul Keeney and MPP for co-collaborating, for all the other partners who have joined hands to organize this event. And I want to thank all the partnering countries who are here as well. Wonderful opportunity to see many new friends. Hello, Victor. We are discussing a very important subject, and I think the background of this is very crucial to bring to bear. And I think that we must recognize that in the wake of COVID, there was a huge inequity that was perhaps inadvertently perpetuated, with Africa not having access to the access that they deserved optimally to vaccines. And in the aftermath of that inequity, there was a realization that we need to somehow remedy this injustice and do something substantive about it. And therefore, a series of conversations ensued, a series of planning processes was kicked off, and there was a broad-based agreement that we need to diversify vaccine manufacturing, that there is a need to invest in supply chain resilience, and that whilst we do that, Africa must be at the heart of those efforts. So I think the background of this must always be brought to bear. And I think we've come quite further along in terms of planning and in terms of executing one of the several things that will make this happen, which brings us to the African Vaccine Manufacturing Accelerator, which is an innovative financing instrument which Gavi has put in place. It's basically an advanced market commitment of $1 billion. We've already raised the money. We've designed the instrument. Our policy committee has signed off on the design of the instrument. We've agreed on its inclusive governance arrangements. And next week, the final modalities of AVMA will be presented to our governing body, the board, its governance mechanism, the management of its treasury, the modalities of its functioning, the oversight mechanisms, the stakeholder collaborative arrangements. In its entirety, the entire package will be presented to the board. Our respective committees have already signed off on them. And then, of course,
Et
we'll wait
à
for our
l'ensemble de
turn
nos
to
partenaires.
come, for our turn to operationalize the instrument. As Her Excellency the Ambassador said right at the very outset, this is a pull mechanism. It is a catalyst. The AVMA at this stage is a catalyst to signal to the industry that yes, there is appetite, and hopefully when the other pieces get up and running, we already have the money to be able to underwrite. We already have the money to be able to subsidize and to act as a catalyst. But it's important to recognize that AVMA is one of the several pieces of a puzzle which will actually pave the road to the goal of vaccine sovereignty that you so rightly aspire towards. We are one of the many stakeholders who will help you achieve this objective. And along that road, there are many other steps, and along the road, there are many other stakeholders who have to play a part. The impetus has to come from governments. Governments in Africa have to make sure, as a starting point, that they have the right policy, enabling policy environment. And of course, when governments want the private sector to invest in a particular area, there are a range of things that governments do. And as a former cabinet member in Pakistan, I know that this set of policy initiatives will involve and must involve a clear signaling to the private sector, appropriate institutional arrangements to mobilize the capital that one of you talked about, investments in human capital, fast-track investments in regulatory capacity. And given that I know how Africa works as a very coordinated regional bloc, I think as a region, you have to explore where the capacity exists for you to tap into the chemical industry, because access to active pharmaceutical ingredients, APIs, and the petrochemical industry will be a very important part of this equation. You will start with fill and finish, but to achieve the goal of vaccine sovereignty, fill and finish is just one step on a long path. And in order to be totally sovereign, you will have to make sure that you are sovereign with regards to the upstream chemical requirements and the active pharmaceutical ingredients. And I'm sure that Africa, as a very well-coordinated regional bloc, with the help of the African Union, will work towards this end, even as you're beginning on this journey. Then, of course, at a country level, we are all conscious that the current macroeconomic environment of many countries is not very conducive. That's an affliction all of us in the developing world face with. And interest rates deeply matter for an investor. The overall business environment and ease of business engagement really matters. The amount of subsidies that the government announces for a particular sector, the tax breaks that it underpins in its budget are very important. So the discourse on the African Vaccine Manufacturing Accelerator at a country level is not a conversation that you have to have with the health ministers alone. It is a conversation that you have to have with your ministers of finance, with the ministers of industry, and it is at the head of state level that this decision has to be taken. The World Bank has to be involved through and through. the other development financial institutions that assist you in this work have to be involved, particularly on the financing side, particularly on the side of creating the right windows of engagement with investors. And that's a whole new set of competencies, that's a whole new set of policy frameworks that are totally outside of the realm of the health sector. And the sooner you start engaging at that level, the sooner you start preparing, the better it would be for you. And then, of course, there are actors within the international system who have a very important role to play. Richard is here and will tell you how important the role of CEPI is. WHO, as the overall steward, has a huge role to play within this space. And of course, Gavi, with its little role that we play in terms of being a mechanism of procurement, has put the cards on the table. And we'd like to say in humility that we are a catalyst to show to the private world, to show to the governments that yes, we are serious in our endeavors to help you. But we are one of the players, and our role comes towards the tail end, when the brick and mortar is set up, when the regulatory capacity is all there, when the investors are there with money, when the manufacturing plants are up and running, when you're producing at quality, when you're competing in UNICEF tenders. That is when we'll come with the $1 billion. And I hope that time will come very soon. This is a long road. If this is a national aspiration that you have, not just with regards to vaccine sovereignty, not just with regards to pandemic preparedness, but also as an economic investment, as a way to boost your economy, as a way to create jobs, then this is a choice that Africa has made. We will stand with you. But I just want to let you know that we are just one piece of the puzzle. We are well set up to play our part, but we want the ecosystem to start working. And then I promise you, we will start on the next day. Thank you very much for having us at the table.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sania Nishta, for highlighting Gavi's strategy for access and support for regional production in Africa and for standing with Africa, as she said. And so that concludes the first part of our event. And now it's my pleasure to begin our panel discussion on building a sustainable, realistic, and effective vaccine ecosystem right across Africa. How can we meet the challenges presented by supply chain issues, lack of investment, as we heard, and policy harmonization head on? So join me in welcoming our distinguished panelists. We have Ms. Mar Martinez, International Cooperation Officer for Health Policy and Programs at the European Commission. Mr. Michael Luciola, CEO of BioVax, also with us. Mr. Tenu Avafia, Deputy Executive Director at Unitaid. Mr. Frederick Christensen, Managing Director of RVMC, the Regional Vaccine Manufacturing Collaborative, and also representing CEPI. And Amy Dieterich, Director of the Global Challenges Division at the World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO. A round of applause, please. Thank you. Thank you all very much for being with us. Thank you for taking the time. Mar Martinez, let me start with you. As we know, nothing, of course, gets done without proper financing and investment. So from your perspective, what do you think needs to happen to attract funding and know-how to establish an effective vaccine ecosystem on the African continent? And what is the European Commission doing in this regard? It's on already.
Oh, thanks so much. Thanks so much to the organizers and also to everybody who came this afternoon. I really like the way you pose the question, because we are used in the European Commission, and I think all the other donors as well, we are used to get funding requests, but you are also linking funding to the importance of attracting know-how and talent. Some of you know that the European Commission, together with France and together with other EU member states, plus financing institutions, we have mobilized already 1.3 billion since 2021 to support this agenda. This is part of a partnership known as MAF+, Manufacturing and Access to Vaccines and Other Health Products. And I would say there are at least 3 main ingredients for success and to attract investors. The first one is leadership, and luckily this leadership is happening. We have had some presentations before, notably the African Union and the African CDC. And this leadership is not merely something vague, it's something very concrete. It's really becoming specific, and that gives a sense to donors and investors that the environment is stable and that this can be a long-term endeavor. The second ingredient is another ship, it's entrepreneurship. Abebe presented earlier the 23 companies that are already active in the vaccine space, but there are many others. And I think, and I see many companies here also, I think the beauty of partnering with the private sector is that the private sector dares to dream. Many companies are dreaming the impossible, and they will make the impossible happen. And again, it's also because the dream is becoming concrete and very specific, and they are developing their business cases. And the third main ingredient, I would say, is partnerships. And the partnerships are happening both at the macro level and also at the micro level. At the macro level, a good example is what we are experiencing here now with MPP, France, and all my fellow panelists. But I think when it comes to the project level, it's very clear that in order to do something that is sustainable, we need multi-stakeholder partnership. So I would say these are the 3 main ingredients, and I want to conclude this part highlighting that we are all learning in this process. So in the case of the European Commission, we are providing funding, but this needs to be oriented to very concrete targets, and we are developing new tools. I think the usual way of doing business through traditional grants is not enough, so that's why we are putting forward proposals to offer blended finance warranties. In October, we launched a partnership with the European Investment Bank and with the Gates Foundation to offer warranties and then to help entrepreneurs and the private sector to de-risk their investments. So that's perhaps the path to follow. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you so much for your response. And I'll come back to you in a minute to ask you about how we harmonize policy frameworks, which we often talk about in the case of Africa. But let me come to you, Michael Luciola. By the year 2029, Kenya will no longer be part of Gavi, no longer be a Gavi country. And the government, your government, has committed to build its own capacity for the production of vaccines, with the hope that Kenya becomes self-sufficient, of course, in its vaccine needs. And your company, Biovax, is at the heart of this effort, right? So talk to us about your steps, the steps that you're taking now to ensure that you're ready by 2029. What progress have you made with this big facility that you have now in Kenya, this big warehouse? Where are you at?
Thank you very much for the question, and thank you for having me here this afternoon. Kenya is already embarked on the process of graduating from Gavi support, which in a way it's a good thing. Indirectly, that message is that Kenya has developed as an economic powerhouse in Africa. And now the expectation is that Kenya should be able to sort itself out in terms of its own vaccines need. And thanks to the effort and the development initiatives within government, we've graduated. We're now within the lower middle income bracket when it comes to GNI. So that then throws us into this mix of where we have to make sure we prepare ourselves for eventual complete divorce from Gavi, if you like. And that's why we are setting up the Kenya Biovax Institute in terms of physical infrastructure, in terms of workforce development, in terms of connecting with other manufacturers to develop technology transfer partnerships and collaborations. We are working very hard to make sure that the regulatory framework within country gets to the level that is required to allow us to be able to release vaccines within Kenya, but also outside the borders. So all these efforts are being actively championed. We're in a very good place in terms of political leadership and the push from the presidency, twofold. One, as you probably know, the universal health coverage is a key development objective in Kenya today. And so we have that blessing from right at the top, where we're required to make healthcare products safe, effective, high quality healthcare products available to the population without them going into financial difficulties. That's one of them. And then secondly, it's about local manufacturing, which is a key economic pillar in the country at the moment. So these two efforts from the political leadership is helping us to get to where we want to be. Okay. So we hope to be able to get to that space very soon. We're already setting up we have a brownfield site. We're setting up the machinery and the equipment that will enable us to get to where we want to be. So thank you.
So I mean, Gavi extended its support by 2 years. Kenya will be ready on time? You can promise us that here?
Of course, yeah, that's the challenge that's been thrown to us. We know it's a big challenge, but we're throwing in all the stops to make sure that we are able to be ready by that time.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Michael. Tenu, let me come to you and ask you about your thoughts. How do we increase local and regional manufacturing of vaccines while at the same time building a robust and effective vaccine ecosystem on the continent?
Thank you very much for the question, and good evening, everyone. Thank you to the organizers, France, the Medicines Patent Pool, WHO, and the partners for organizing this very important discussion. I think for me, there are a few takeaways, and the one is to learn from the lessons of history. 20 years ago, I was living in Southern Africa at the height of the AIDS epidemic, and at the time, what you would see is, on a regular basis, announcements by various authorities of plans to set up manufacturing facilities because their populations had high burdens of HIV, not that that translated into viable markets. So that was the one thing. We saw market fragmentation, which really diminished the possibility of having an economy of scale that would make it viable in the first place. And then the second big hurdle, of course, was the inability to get pre-qualified for WHO, which would then unlock access to much larger procurement vehicles. So listening to that and reflecting on some of the lessons from that, I would say we really there needs to be political leadership to not fragment the market. And I was very heartened by Dr. Abebe's remarks, actually, because it's that high-level political leadership to say that we will support each other's industries, even if it means that it is not politically expedient, but it's a politically brave decision to say that we will support the industries of a neighboring country, because that's what we need for a sustainable economy of scale to make this viable. So that would be the one. I think for us, the second one is the complexity of the ecosystem. So we've heard from many speakers before, and I won't repeat the multiple dimensions that are determinants of manufacturing either being successful or being impeded. For us at Unitaid, we have a track record, first of all, of helping to establish and shape markets, and also walking the path with companies and with countries to address the multiple barriers they'll face along the way. And this is one example where we have ready to take to our board, it's been approved by the committees as well, a regional manufacturing approach. And what we plan to do is to issue a call to gather expertise across a breadth of subject matter, because frankly, it's going to take walking a very long and arduous road with manufacturers and putting building blocks in place so that we work towards sustainability. So for me, those would be the two building blocks of an ecosystem: political leadership, and then also acknowledging how multifaceted it is, and crowding in partnerships.
Political leadership and acknowledging the complexities, as you say, of the ecosystem. Let's hear the view from CEPI now. Frederick, how do we mitigate the various challenges posed by the lack of supply chains, as we heard, or raw materials in effort to scale up vaccine manufacturing on the continent?
Yeah, thank you very much, and merci à la France, MPP et aussi à l'OMS pour nous inviter ici. It's great to be here. I have to say, just to begin with, that I have sort of two hats here. You mentioned it briefly, that there's the CEPI hat, which is sliding off my head, and there's the RVMC hat, which is sliding on. RVMC is a new initiative hosted by CEPI and also funded by CEPI, and sort of located with CEPI and in CEPI, but it is a broader partnership, so I'll come back to that. I think to address your question, just to say two words about CEPI and what CEPI is doing with this. CEPI is, as you know, committed to supporting regional vaccine manufacturing, and Dr. Abebe mentioned the supply chain meeting that was held in Kenya early in the year, and you know, following up on some of the findings from that. CEPI is also establishing a network of partners globally. So on the continent, it's IPD and Aspen, and there's also broader partnerships and strategic partnerships in place across the globe, with a focus on epidemic and pandemic preparedness. And some of you may have heard that today there was also an announcement of expanding one of those strategic partnerships with BioNTech in Rwanda. And this, I think, is part of a bigger plan or initiative to really support regional vaccine manufacturing, and as a result of that, you know, boost the regional end-to-end R&D and manufacturing ecosystem, and also working with innovations like Welcome Leap, because I think focus on innovations is a critical piece, allowing potentially new manufacturers to leapfrog some of the old technologies. So trying to work through several channels to sort of really focus on supporting mRNA development, and of course collaborating with the mRNA hub as well. So briefly then, just on RVMC, which is a new initiative, we will be supporting, and I've already established, or in the process of establishing collaboration with Africa CDC, with PAO and other regional bodies to further support this, not only for epidemic and pandemic preparedness, but also for sort of day-to-day vaccine manufacturing needs.
Right. Okay, and I'll ask you in a moment about the financing mechanism, some of the innovative financing mechanisms that you think could work. But let me bring Amy into the conversation first. Amy, what role then, WIPO, of course you're representing WIPO, what role does WIPO play in accelerating vaccine and therapeutic production for health security in Africa?
Yeah, so thank you so much, Folly. And I'd really like to also thank the organizers, France and MPP, for inviting WIPO, because despite the fact that intellectual property is a phrase that's on everybody's lips here in Geneva and worldwide, I feel like not a lot is known about the UN Specialized Agency for Intellectual Property, which is WIPO, which I represent. So this is really a wonderful occasion for us. And probably most people don't know that WIPO provides quite a few services that support both the innovation and access sides of vaccine and therapeutic production in Africa. And we're supporting countries and innovators and manufacturers. And let me just briefly kind of give an overview of how we do that. So for countries, we really focus on a holistic view of IP, as important to support homegrown innovators and to support the business space, and to recognize that IP is a powerful tool for economic sustainability, especially when it comes to growing Africa's SMEs. We also provide technical assistance to help countries to design their IP laws and to help those to align with their national priorities. And finally, when it comes to countries, we help them to address the challenge of substandard and falsified medicines by using specifically trademarks to help seize shipments of falsified medicines to the continent. When it comes to our support for innovators, we're really helping to support the homegrown innovators by providing them with tools to fund and further develop their innovations, and importantly so, to help bring them to market. We do that partly through technology innovation support centers, of which there are over 1,000 across the world, including many on the continent. And that's various levels of hand-holding of the innovators to help them, for example, to understand how to do freedom to operate searches, things that are really going to help businesses to bring their innovations to market. And then finally, we're supporting manufacturers themselves with the licensing in of IP rights and trade secrets in support of diversified production, but also by providing arbitration and mediation services to reduce the risk that IP disputes could actually bog down critical contract negotiations.
Amy, just a quick follow-up. Intellectual property is crucial, of course, and you've highlighted that. But as we've been discussing, policy adaptation and regulatory frameworks are also crucial to support and grow local vaccine manufacturing. So what do you think governments on the African continent should be doing in this regard?
So I'll focus my comments there on the IP space. I don't want to touch too much regulatory, because as you can imagine, that's not very much in WIPO's wheelhouse, and I don't want it to bleed over there. But so just focusing on the IP side and what governments can do on the IP side. So first of all, and actually Sonia touched on this in her introductory remarks, the importance of bringing all the various parts of government together. And oftentimes what we see is that when that happens, the IP offices are not included in places where they should be. Because of course, national IP policies are going to impact innovation and access to medicines. So that would be one of my first key recommendations, is to please include your national IP authority in important local production and access to medicines discussions. It will serve everybody very, very well. Also, the importance of taking a very broad look at IP as a tool for economic development that's really going to positively support the sustainability of any regional and local production initiatives in Africa. IP is there to ensure that your businesses are economically sustainable, so use it for that. Also, the importance of seeing IP as a tool to reward innovators and to help them to recoup their investment, and provide further incentives to innovate. And IP is also a way to help businesses value themselves and attract investors. So IP is going to be a really powerful tool to help attract investors to the continent that is going to make these initiatives sustainable in the long term.
Thank you very much, Amy. Mara, let me come to you, since Amy didn't want to answer the question about policy adaptation and harmonization. The example of India, of course, is often cited when we talk about the ability to harmonize policy frameworks. And so what sort of examination do you think that needs to happen for policy adaptation and regulatory harmonization in Africa?
This is, to me, a very complex question in a way. But at the same time, we can start by recognizing that the reality of the African continent is very peculiar. And luckily, we have an important initiative led by AUDA NEPAD, or AUDA NEPAD. And they have been leading this agenda for the past 10, 15 years. So we are fully supporting the African Medicines Regulatory Harmonization Initiative. And there are other developments as well at the continental level in Africa, like the African Continental Free Trade Area. And I think these are really the developments that can shape the markets and notably can have a difference. So what we can do from the perspective of the European Union is sharing our own reflections, because we are also a regional body. For example, the European Medicines Agency was founded already in 1995. It's a network of over 50 regulators with over 4,000 experts overseeing 500,000 products. And we have other experiences as well, for example, on joint procurement, experiences on the European health data space, more recently, we also passed a regulation on, for example, health technology assessment. So we did some mistakes. We learn from the mistakes, and we are very willing to share also our experience.
Okay, Michael, perhaps you'd like to add something about that, but also, we talked about funding and how important it is and crucial it is at this stage, and you've received substantial funding from the World Bank. That's crucial, obviously, but there is also the issue of boosting trade, right, in between countries. So once your facility is set up, how do we make sure that, you boost that trade between Kenya and Uganda, for example?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And I think I'll just go straight into it. And earlier today, we had a very exciting conversation around regionalization led by the RVMC. And this is all about two things. One is about the scale, and two is about the speed. Now, when you talk about scale, we're looking at the size of the market. So we're looking at the regional market. And when we have harmonization of the trade agreements within these regions, then that automatically boosts trade. But secondly, it's also about logistics. It's about how does a vaccine get move from Kenya to Uganda or from Ethiopia to Rwanda. It's about infrastructure. Do we have those in place to be able to facilitate that movement? And thirdly, it's about local policies and trade tariffs and exemptions across various countries. Those are the things that will stimulate trade across the borders.
So maybe your thoughts about this. How do we improve conditions then? Pass him the microphone, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think policy coherence is critical. The intellectual property obviously has a role to play, but so too does government procurement, so too does trade policy, industrial policy, your medicines legislation, your competition laws and policies. So it's the entire ecosystem that needs to be coherent and moving towards the desired outcome of the national objective. Second point I'd make is I actually see this agenda as a chance not just for African manufacturers to catch up, but potentially even to leapfrog in some cases and to become competitive on an international level. Case in point, Unitaid's work on climate smart products. We recently visited a manufacturer in Kenya who was extremely keen on learning how to decarbonize his products because he had the foresight to realize that this could become a comparative advantage when it came to procurement. And it could give them actually an advantage. And so these are the types of things that we should be putting forward to help manufacturers to be able to do. And then the final one, I think, is for us at Unitaid, it remains about the market. So if we start with what diseases, what products are there the greatest needs for in sub-Saharan Africa, malaria. We have a recent also project in Nigeria called the Safe Birth Project on domestic manufacturing in partnership with the EC and with UNFPA. And it's focused on postpartum hemorrhage because that's one of the biggest killers of women in sub-Saharan Africa. So let's look at the market issues. Let's focus on where the demand is, and then let's put those building blocks in place so that 20 years from now, we can talk about the successes that of the building blocks that we've put in place.
Right. Frederick, your thoughts about that? And who says, let's look at market issues. What should we be looking at specifically in your
I think, well, first of all, I'm not a financing specialist, but I would say that you've already covered most of these pieces. I think two things. One, on the demand side, is really important to have more in-depth analysis of the demand and the market dynamics as a starting point. And then on the financing side, I think what we're hearing is the need for a mixed model funding, and of course CEPI is focusing, and other organizations like Unitaid are focusing on supporting R&D and sort of push funding. There's a big need for different types of demand funding, and Richard Hatchett was talking in a previous session about the nobody can do this alone. It's really about aligning all these different incentive mechanisms. We've heard about AVMA, we've heard about Africa CDC's plans for pool procurement, looking at market opportunities outside of Africa. I was struck by joining a session yesterday organized by government of Japan on innovative financing, looking to mechanisms to crowd in more private funding through what is called Impact Investment Initiative for Global Health. And so there's a $1 billion market out there on impact investors who are looking for both financial returns and making sure that they're doing social good. And how can we get a bigger share of that into healthcare and into manufacturing, I think is another innovative opportunity.
Before I open up the floor, questions from the floor, we take questions from the floor. Michael, I just wanted to ask you about the question of having a skilled workforce and retaining it. How are you doing that in Kenya? Training component of all this.
Thank you for the question. I think in Kenya we're placed in a very good position in terms of the skilled workforce. We have a very robust training system when you look at the healthcare professionals, research and development. We have a well-renowned medical research institute that's churning out scientists, medical scientists. We have universities that are churning out biomedical engineers. So in terms of building that skill set, what we need now is to provide the playing ground for these highly skilled, theoretically highly skilled students or people to be able to apply their hands in biomanufacturing. So that is one thing that we're doing in Kenya, working with partners, global partners, including the International Vaccines Institute, including partners like Unizima who've helped us in terms of biomanufacturing training, hands-on biomanufacturing training. So those are opportunities that we're exposing our people to make sure that we retain that workforce. In addition, we're working on remuneration packages, because it's one thing to attract, but we also want to retain. We want, if Moderna comes and they're paying their CEO $1 million per month, we want to be able to match that. So a package that is attractive will help to retain the staff.
Excellent, thank you. So we're going to take some questions from members of the audience, if there are any. There'll be a roving microphone going around, but perhaps I can ask each one of you for a final takeaway. What key message would you like to leave the audience here in Geneva with, as far as what we've been discussing? Amy first, perhaps.
Thanks, Folly. So one of the things that I heard at a very recent Africa regional meeting around local production from many participants was actually the need for training, and this touches on your earlier point, in how to negotiate contracts that are going to involve IP and tech transfer and the licensing of rights, trade secrets, know-how. The fact that when a lot of these negotiations are happening, oftentimes representatives from the continent are at a disadvantage compared to perhaps the tech transfer side that are coming from other continents. So building the capacity on the continent to engage very strategically in these negotiations, both kind of more in the short term where we're talking about tech transfer, but also in the longer term when we're talking about local innovation that is coming from the continent that the rest of the world is going to want.
Thank you very much. Frederick.
One key takeaway.
One key takeaway.
It's hard. I think it must be that we need to continue to work to find better models for sustainability. I mean, I think the big issue is sort of the long-term sustainability of all these initiatives, and how can we honestly move from discussing it to actually finding
implementing
models.
it, and finding better sustainable models. Tenu, your final thought.
Just to highlight the criticality of coordination. You've heard from many actors, and I think everyone has something to bring. What excites me, to be honest, very much is the political leadership, that this is demand-driven and ultimately country-driven, because ultimately we're here to serve the needs of countries and communities. And I think that's a key component I see this time around, which makes me optimistic.
Yeah, political the political will is there. Michael.
I think for me, it's about believing in ourselves, to have the firm belief that we're able to do this and move from conversations and discussions and roundtable panel meetings to execution. I think it's high time that we got our hands dirty and put up that facility and just see what happens. As I said, it's you shoot first and then you aim. I hope we can get there.
Okay, Mar.
And from my side, when I look back, I realize that in the past 2 or 3 years, we all collectively have achieved a lot. I think we are now in May 2024 in a spot where we never imagined that we will arrive. So I think we need to keep pushing our boundaries further, and we can go very far if we go together.
Very far together. Thank you very much, Mar. So we'll take some questions now from the audience. Any questions? Don't be shy. Comments? Questions? All these great scientists in this room, and there's not one question? Oh, there, the lady in the back. Can, Victoria, 1 second. We're going to bring you a microphone.
Thank you so much. Helen Philpott, IPPS, supporting the 100-day mission. Brilliant panel. Thank you for how pragmatic this discussion was. I was really excited when I saw the title of this was about accelerating vaccine and therapeutics production security in Africa. But I feel like we haven't actually touched so much on the therapeutics. And I just wondered if there was any comments from the panel about how any of this differs for therapeutics, how some efficiencies might be made about thinking about vaccine and therapeutic manufacturing and R&D collectively, and diagnostics as well. Please, can we think about how all three tools can be produced together? I thought that was brilliant in the Africa CDC presentation we heard earlier, but any reflections on efficiencies that might be made about thinking about these plants having all three tools produced together, procured together? Over. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Who wants to take that question? Not just about vaccines, but also therapeutics, as the lady there. Michael, do you want to go ahead?
Thank you, and that's a really good question. And that is a kind of questions that has led the Africa CDC to move away from the PAVM, the Partnerships for Africa Vaccines Manufacturing, to something more holistic to involve other healthcare products and technologies, including therapeutics and diagnostics. So the remit for the Africa CDC is much broader. In Kenya now, our example, we have a very robust pharmaceutical manufacturing industry. We manufacture a lot of the medicines that are being used internally and also exported. So we have a solid industry when it comes to pharma, but we haven't had much experience in terms of vaccines other than animal vaccines. And that's why the emphasis for us in Kenya is really on human vaccines.
Okay, great. Another question. Yes. I'll come to you in a second.
Thank you. Which place do you think academic organizations, universities, can play a role in your task force in order to ensure multidisciplinary university academic perspective in order to engage citizens in participatory activities and open science activities? Which role of universities do you plan?
Perhaps? How do we engage citizens?
Yep. No, I can take this, and thanks so much for the question. I will go back to something that Tenu said in his intervention when he emphasized the importance of having a multifaceted approach. I think it's also a multi-stakeholder approach. In the case of the European Union, we have a big initiative known as Global Gateway. We tend to say it's a 360-degree approach. And there we have skills, something fundamental. We also have the regulatory dimension. We have a number of pillars. And certainly the linkages with the academia are there. Just to give you an example, in Rwanda, a few months ago, we partnered with local universities, and we helped the launching of a Master of Science and a PhD. So certainly we are starting to do things. We can do more, and basically we are very open also to your suggestions and ideas.
Thank you very much, Mar. Oh, briefly, and then we'll take one last question because I'm being told that we need to wrap up soon.
I think for us, it's about research output commercialization. So in Kenya, for example, we have the Kenya Medical Research Institute, we've got the universities, a lot of brilliant work, brilliant science is going on in these institutions. What we've lacked before is an avenue where these research outputs can be commercialized. And that's how BioVax comes in. That's how other manufacturing facilities come in to allow that commercialization of those research outputs.
Okay, great. So one last question. The lady, yes, go ahead. Victoria, in the third row here, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Folly. It's so moving to be here. Stéphanie Sédou, I am the Sherpa for the director of the WHO. And this is an initiative which really has blossomed and is now really reaching its full speed, and it's extraordinary to be a witness to this. Great question just now, and simply flagging, but I'm sure that Dr. Farrar, who will close the event, will mention the WHO Academy, which of course, not for initial training, but for vocational training, will definitely bring a contribution to the capacity building. And my question was more about the market sustainability and how does one go over this hurdle of local production being considered as somehow destined to be more expensive, not necessarily as cost effective as other more established the more established productions. And we heard Dr. Sanya earlier mentioning the API question, so wondering whether you had thoughts to share about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sédou, for that question. Tenu, perhaps, or yeah?
Sure, I think it's a very important question. Unitaid recently undertook quite an in-depth market study of manufacturing in sub-Saharan Africa and focused on a few diseases. And the findings were that in some instances, manufacturers on the continent were able to not just be in the same bracket as the competitors from the subcontinent, but in some cases were actually even more competitive. So it's really about looking at the product, looking at the market, looking at the factors, be it transport, be it tariffs, taxes, the whole ecosystem. But once you delve deeper, I think the opportunities automatically float to the surface. So my conclusion would be that it's really about being as specific as possible, and the products and the suppliers and the manufacturers identify themselves.
Frederick, you would like to add to that?
Yeah, just a very brief comment to say that I think it will be more expensive to begin with, but IFC did a study comparing local production to regionalized production and showed that regionalized would be cheaper over, I think, 5 to 7 years in the countries they studied. We need the same data for regional versus global, which we don't have yet, but I'm pretty convinced that with combination of leapfrogging, technology development, and getting to scale over time, we can be competitive in sort of a 10-year frame.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of our 5 panelists. Please, a round of applause for our finalists for that great discussion. Thank you for your invaluable expertise, your insight on this very important topic. Thank you, Amy, Frederick, Tenu, Michael, Mar. Thank you once again. And now I'd like to invite Dr. Jeremy Farrar, Chief Scientist at the World Health Organization, for his final remarks. Dr. Farrar.
Thanks very much indeed. I've only got half an hour talk, so don't worry. Thank you very much to France, our ambassador, Anne-Claire, Marie-Paul, MPP, and all others who have brought us together again. And to France particularly, both for this, but also for the very, very strong support France has given to the Academy. I added that. But also to science at WHO. Certainly in the year I've been, and I'm sure before that. So very, very much appreciated. I was here last year and I got invited back again, which tells you I may not get invited back again. But I said when I was finishing last year that it's a privilege to be here. wherever we come from in the world, to come to Geneva, to have freedom of the French residence and mission here and look over the lake, and we stay in hotels and all the rest of it. It's a privilege to be here. And many warm words are spoken, but it's not what the warm words are said, it's what we do when we leave. And there are many things which are very complex in the world, and where I sometimes worry that the warm words do not deliver when people leave, and the warm words seem enough. This is an area that is a beacon of hope and a true ray of light, because of all the things I've been involved in the last year and before that with colleagues here, I think this has made more progress than almost anything else that's been talked about in this setting. And that has not happened by chance. It's happened because people made actions, they took decisions, and they made progress. Now, is it got to where it needs to get to? By no means. And we should also appreciate, as I think on the last panel you said, you mentioned a 20-year cycle. And the reality is that if we're going to shift the center of gravity, it's going to take a long time. And it's going to take a long time of good policy, of good decision-making, investments from governments and from industry, and the 7 things that Marie-Paul mentioned at the start. For those that can't remember, there'll be a test over your glass of wine later. I've learned over 20 or 30 years to agree with Marie-Paul because the opposite is much worse. And I agree with all 7 totally, but I am going to pick out one because I think one is never stressed enough, and actually ask you also to join with us in some work that we're leading within the science team at WHO, and that is people. Ultimately, AI and robots, we know, will be standing here next year and giving all of the speeches and the panel, but the reality is people matter. And that's why I was so pleased on that last panel you addressed the issue of scientific ecosystems, scientific careers, and discovery science, as well as those scientists going into regulator, into industry, going into policy making. We need more scientists, we need more policymakers that are scientific literate, and we need more scientists that are policy literate. And it's not a failure of a career, I keep telling myself, to leave science and go into policy making, although ask me next year if I still think that. I also think that that requires sustained investment, and the international funding for that, having come from being head of Wellcome and an international funder, is wonderful. But ultimately, domestic funding really matters. That is the infrastructure that counts, that's counted in Kenya, that's counted in many other countries. But if you don't have that domestic infrastructure in careers, universities, academic, as the question earlier, then I don't think international funding will fall on a situation which can be ultimately sustained and ultimately owned by countries. So if we are, as we must, shift the center of gravity, but research and development, manufacturing, production, export, and everything else, if we don't invest in people that can make that happen over a protracted period of time, so they feel trust in your research agencies and your universities, that they can have a career for the long term, then I do not believe we will build and shift that center of gravity. And I will also pick up on the comment earlier, which I absolutely strongly agree with, and we've seen evidence of it here to be critical. It ain't all about vaccines. If we don't think of vaccines, therapeutics, diagnostics, and indeed social and behavioral interventions, then I'm afraid we won't be better prepared for the next pandemic, and we won't build the trust in society that we need to rebuild after the previous pandemic. So especially as also therapeutics and vaccines are going to increasingly blur. What we currently think of as a therapeutic and a vaccine will increasingly blur in the years ahead, particularly in the way they're delivered, with longer acting drugs coming on the markets in the next coming years. So if we ignore therapeutics, then remember, we don't have an HIV vaccine. I hope we will have a TB vaccine this year, but therapeutics remains absolutely critical, even though I'm obviously a great fan of CEPI and all of it. And the last thing I'll say, I do believe we're in a scientific golden age, but we can either use science to increase inequity, or we can use science to decrease inequity. We have a choice. And the choices we make in the next few years will define, I think, the 21st century. So thank you very much. I hope I get invited back again, but if not, you're
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Farrar, and to all of our distinguished guests and panelists for taking part in today's event. Thanks once again to all the partners and the people who've organized this event today, MPP and Jalise and the whole team. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to invite our hosts, Ambassador. Oh, he's not here. It's okay. Okay. I will let you have the closing words then, Marie-Claire. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup d'avoir été là ce soir et merci vraiment pour ces échanges fructueux. En fait, je ne vais pas faire de conclusion parce que de toute façon, quand il y a Jérémy dans un panel, il faut parler avant, pas après. Et donc, je vais faire juste une invitation, c'est de rester avec nous et de nous rejoindre au cocktail qui nous attend, qui est prêt. Et merci encore pour ces échanges et à l'année prochaine avec toujours la conclusion de Jérémy.